It's their second hug and handshake this year. Modi and Putin, who are good friends with each other, have just met at the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. Putin welcomed his dost Modi to the BRICS summit in Kazan with a very warm hug, the second hug by the two leaders this year, and the third meeting between Putin and Modi in a span of just 3 months, a sign of very deep ties between the two countries. At the bilateral that's currently on, Prime Minister Modi reiterated his big message of peace to Putin amidst Russia's ongoing war, now in its third year with Ukraine.
एक्सेलेंसी, रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं। हमारे सभी प्रयास मानवता को प्रमुखता देते हैं। आने वाले समय में भी भारत हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले 3 महीनों में मेरा 2 बार रूस आना हमारे करीबी समन्वय और गहरी मित्रता को दर्शाता है। जुलाई में मॉस्को में हुई हमारी एनुअल समिट से हर क्षेत्र में हमारे सहयोग को बल मिला है। इस शहर के साथ भारत के गहरे और ऐतिहासिक संबंध रहे हैं। कजान में भारत के नए कॉन्सुलेट के खुलने से ये संबंध और मजबूत होंगे।
गवर्नमेंट्स стояли у истоков создания объединения।
हम रूस और भारत के बीच जो सहयोग चल रहा है, हम वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण मानते हैं।
И очередное заседание межправкомиссии намечено на 12 ноября в Нью-Дели।
और 12 दिसंबर को नई दिल्ली में अंतर सरकारी आयोग की अगली बैठक होने वाली है।
Последовательно развиваются крупные проекты।
हमारी बड़ी परियोजनाएं लगातार विकसित हो रहे हैं।
И мы приветствуем ваше решение открыть в Казани генеральное консульство Индии।
और जो आपने कजान में भारत का कौंसल जनरल खोलने का निर्णय लिया, हम इसका स्वागत करते हैं।
Расширение дипломатического присутствия Индии в России будет способствовать дальнейшему развитию двусторонних отношений।
भारत के कूटनीतिक उपस्थिति से हमारे सहयोग को फायदा मिलेगा।
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, мы очень рады видеть вас и всю вашу представительную команду в России।
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, हम आपको और आपकी प्रतिनिधि मंडल रूस में देखने से हमको बड़ी खुशी है। ये एक ऐतिहासिक बहुत दिलचस्प शहर है जो वोल्गा नदी के किनारे पर स्थित है। मुझे याद है कि हमारे जुलाई की मुलाकात की याद है जब हमारे बहुत अच्छे चर्चा हुई बहुत विषयों पर। इसके बीच हम टेलीफोन पर कई बार हमने बात की। कजान आने का आमंत्रण स्वीकार करने के लिए मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ। तो आज हम ब्रिक्स शिखर सम्मेलन के उद्घाटन सेरेमनी में भाग लेंगे और उसके बाद डिनर के समय हम भी बात करेंगे दूसरे नेताओं के साथ। आज आने वाले ब्रिक्स के दौरान, समिट के दौरान हमें कई बहुत महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय पर पूरा करना चाहिए। तो एक बार फिर कजान में आपका स्वागत है।
And there's now big suspense over a possible bilateral between the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President. Remember, the two countries have announced reaching a surprise resolution that will begin the journey towards normalisation in the standoff zone in Ladakh, a warlike situation that has been on for the last 4.5 years and counting. The two sides, after multiple meetings and no real forward movement since 2022, have announced between yesterday and today that they've reached an agreement towards disengagement and the resumption of routine troop patrolling. Basically, an end to the standoff could possibly be in sight, but we need to be skeptical. However, the fact is the decks appear to be cleared for a big Modi-Xi bilateral meeting. Will it happen today? Could it happen tomorrow? There is no clarity because there is no official word and no official acknowledgement or announcement confirming that the two leaders are going to meet. Both leaders are in Kazan for the BRICS summit. Remember, China and India are both part of the BRICS grouping. The bilateral with Putin is done. Will there be a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping? Let's find out. India Today's Gaurav Sawant is on the ground in Kazan, the only Indian journalist reporting for mainstream media from the ground in Kazan. Gaurav, it is the big question. The Modi-Putin bilateral is done. Very much on expected lines. Two old friends, with their third meeting just so far this year, establishing for the entire world that India has a foreign policy that is very much its own. But all eyes now, Gaurav, on that very, very big question. Are Modi and Xi Jinping going to be meeting next? Both leaders are in Kazan, where you are right now. But both sides have been extremely tight-lipped, Gaurav, about whether they're going to meet and, more importantly, when they're going to meet.
Shiv, there is tremendous expectation, there is tremendous enthusiasm that yes, the two would be meeting is most likely is the word here. Scheduling, we are told, is an issue. An effort was being made to find some time perhaps later today. But we are told that both sides have found it very tough to schedule it today. It is likely to happen in the next 24 hours. Whether it can happen late today or sometimes tomorrow, perhaps before the second half tomorrow, that is what we are told, that there is a meeting and both sides are keen on the meeting, is what sources are telling India Today. China is also very keen to dial down tensions with India. As you very rightly pointed out, Shiv, yes, there is forward movement, but this is only tactical disengagement that is taking place at this stage between India and China. Very, very tactical disengagement. There still remains that big question, which is, will this tactical disengagement lead to de-escalation, which is extremely critical, which is moving back, the heavy firepower that both sides have on the line of actual control, and not just in Depsang and Demchok in eastern Ladakh, but all along the line of actual control, but especially in eastern Ladakh. Are you going to move back your tanks? Are you going to move back your 155mm howitzers, the armored personnel carriers, the mechanized infantry columns? And then are you going to disengage and then de-induct those troops, they send them back to their peacetime location? That is of tremendous importance, so that there is no situation where the two sides could once again amass troops very quickly. Shiv, as you know better than others, China is able to mobilize troops very quickly and get them to their borders. India is improving infrastructure, but may still take some time. So those are issues that India is very, very cagey about. With China, you may want to trust them, but you have to verify everything, because you don't want to go by what China says. You want to very clearly see what China does on ground, verify it before you take the next step. And that is how India is moving forward with tremendous caution this time. So yes, a meeting is likely, perhaps in the next 12 to 24 hours, that meeting could take place.
And as Gaurav and I have been reporting over the last 24 hours since the story broke about this resolution arrived at between India and China, we have been very, very cautious about, any kind of euphoria and even calling it a breakthrough, because Gaurav and I have both seen what this issue between India and China has actually been like for many, many years. And the one thing you can be absolutely certain about when it comes to China is nothing is ever what it seems. There is a great deal of opportunism at play. China, as Gaurav rightly pointed out, has been unusually conciliatory in the last few months, but there is a good reason for that. It's not out of any kind of generosity or munificence. All countries work for their own interests first, and that's not a bad thing, but India has learned a great deal about China and dealing with China. There is no room for emotions when it comes to dealing with China. Only strength respects strength. Gaurav, continue to stay with me. And Gaurav made a very important point about the long journey towards normalization and a complete end to the military standoff that currently exists between India and China in eastern Ladakh. But before that, how did the two countries reach a point where they were able to announce a resolution towards the resumption of patrolling in a place where for over 5 years now, no patrolling has taken place? It has been a warlike situation in eastern Ladakh. How, just a day before the BRICS summit, did the two countries reach a position where they were actually able to share a big, big takeaway between the two countries? Well, the answer is one word: diplomacy. Take a look. A border breakthrough by India and China, a path that leads to the end of the big Ladakh standoff. A day after India made the surprise declaration that a resolution towards peace had been achieved, China has also confirmed a pact with India to end the standoff between the two armies in eastern Ladakh.
Over a recent period of time, China and India have been in close communication through diplomatic and military channels on issues related to China-India border. Now the two sides have reached resolutions on relevant matters, which China speaks highly of. Going forward, China will continue to work with India to implement these resolutions.
The details remain broad. No deals are ever straightforward with China, and the road to the agreement hasn't been an easy one. It was a result of weeks of intense diplomatic and military negotiations. Caution is probably a good idea before celebrating any real breakthrough, but according to government sources, several meetings involving both the Ministry of External Affairs and the Indian Army did take place, with discussions focused on ensuring smooth patrolling in areas where disengagement has already occurred in eastern Ladakh. But the Depsang and Demchok areas presented unique challenges due to their strategic importance and heightened tensions. Rebuilding trust will be key.
The Chinese side is wanting to restore the relationship between India and China to what it was earlier. It wants the other aspects of the relationship like trade, commerce, investment to move ahead. It will, of course, take some time to restore the trust between the two countries, but at least I think a beginning can be made.
India and China have come to an agreement about normal patrolling and that there will be disengagement. And the Foreign Secretary says that, we are now looking at the resolution of the problem which arose in 2020. This is welcome, but let me put it this way: trust but verify.
The timing of the thaw is also crucial. India improving ties with China comes just when it is being hounded by Western powers over alleged operations to kill pro-Khalistani terrorists in those countries. Many experts believe a defreeze in India-China ties could pose a new challenge to the United States. In fact, that could very much be why the two countries have found an opportunity to at least try setting aside their differences. The possibility of India and China going further in resolving their various other disputes will worry the United States, that thinks India has an important role to play in policing the Indo-Pacific to contain Chinese influence. Closer ties between Russia, China and India could also establish the global south as a counterweight to Western hegemony in a world at war. Bureau Report, India Today. Now remember that nothing ever happens without a constant engagement between the two countries. There was bloodletting, there was death in the Galwan Valley in June 2020, but after that there's been a steady engagement between India and China, and especially in the last few months there's been a committed effort to try and resolve the outstanding issues in eastern Ladakh. Just take a look at some of the most recent meetings, like last month when NSA Ajit Doval met with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. In July 2024, you had External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar meeting Wang Yi twice in that same month. There were 21 rounds of military-level talks at the Corps Commander level in Chushul, Moldo, that's in southern Ladakh. There have been 21 rounds of talks that have taken place so far. 31 meetings of the working mechanism for consultation and coordination on the India-China border affairs have taken place as well. And at least some of them, especially in the last 6 months, have yielded what we can now call some kind of a resolution towards a long journey towards normalization. Gaurav continues to be with me on this. Gaurav, the resolution that was announced by India yesterday, confirmed by China today, can be seen as creating the mood, clearing the decks for, the expected bilateral between Modi and Xi Jinping that you'll be reporting on between today and tomorrow. But on the face of it, considering that there has been virtually zero forward movement between the two countries since, if I'm not mistaken, February, March 2022, Gaurav, when you were in fact reporting from Ladakh at that time, this resolution is still a big deal. We need to be cautious. Nothing can be taken at face value. It's a very long journey, but even a small step forward in such a large standoff is still very positive.
Shiv, you're absolutely right. It's a very, very significant step. It may be a tactical move, but only when you take small tactical moves can you aim for the big strategic goal. What is India's aim? Peace and tranquility at the line of actual control. What was the big hindrance? China not moving back from multiple friction points. Constant diplomacy that started, as External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar mentioned, in September 2020. That's when he and Wang Yi met for the first time here in Russia after the Galwan crisis. So September 2020, effort for de-escalation started, effort for disengagement started, and it's finally bearing fruit in October 2024. And once again, that meeting is likely to take place here in Russia, this time between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. But how did this happen? Shiv, as you well know, it's a combination of military strength, diplomatic strength, and political strength. Let's talk about military strength. India's QPQ operations, the quid pro quo operations on Kailash Hills, when you started dominating the Moldo garrison and you were on the Kailash Hills overlooking his G219, his crucial strategic road that goes through that region, that's when China realized that India is not a pushover at all. When India did mirror deployment of more than 50,000 troops all along the LAC in Ladakh and strengthened the deployment all along the middle sector, the eastern sector, North Sikkim, all along, because China tried probe missions in multiple places, and each time they were pushed back rather harshly. And once you'd recall on the Kailash Hills, weapons were discharged. Of course, as a caution, that weapons were discharged to send across that message to China that after Galwan, don't think that bullets will not be fired to protect India's integrity. That message went out loud and clear militarily. The Army and the Air Force, and you've reported so extensively on the mobilization of our troops, using the Chinooks to send tanks to Depsang plains, to get the 155mm howitzers to that area. That showed India's military deployment, the kind of infrastructure development that took place in terms of those 70-ton bridges that could carry heavy tanks in that region, broad roads, black metal roads all across, all the way up to Daulat Beg Oldie that I have reported from. That showed India means business. Advanced landing grounds coming up. Militarily, you're strong. Diplomatically, you're not yielding an inch. Each time Wang Yi came to India, including to New Delhi, no meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, extensive interaction with Jaishankar and Ajit Doval, but one message clear: normalization only after disengagement and de-escalation and re-induction. All of that sent across a message after 4 long years. India means business. Finally, China sees the writing on the wall, and not the China wall. But will it lead to de-escalation and de-induction remain the big tricky questions even now before we celebrate.
Okay, so tactical moves, no euphoria, no major breakthrough, but a positive indication of intent moving forward. There's a long journey ahead. India's guard will not be down even for a moment, and neither will China's. Both countries have reached a place where they're able to announce a joint resolution, but navigating that resolution is going to be the heart of the matter. Gaurav, thanks very much for joining me on this. We will reconnect with you once there's more clarity on the Modi-Xi bilateral that could take place in Kazan, where you're reporting from, between today and tomorrow. Now remember that talking about a resolution where things go back to a pre-2020 routine for the two armies massed against each other in eastern Ladakh is way easier said than done. As you just heard my colleague Gaurav say, the two armies came very close to outright conflict. In fact, there was violence in Galwan, there were shots fired in the south of Pangong, and the two armies continued to be ready for combat and ready for a real escalation that could have gone into the realms of actual war between the two nuclear neighbors. But now that the two countries have announced this resolution, this agreement on the resumption of normalizing troop patrols, disengagement, etc., what does that actually look like on the ground? The diplomats have spoken, they've announced the resolution, but what happens with the military, the soldiers, the commanders on the ground? In this report, I try and explain that. After over 4 years in a frozen war-like situation, 17 meetings at the diplomatic level, and 21 border meets between the two armies, a surprise declaration from the two sides, locked in the world's biggest military standoff. India and China unveil a big step forward. A day after India announced a jointly achieved resolution to resume army patrolling by both sides on the tense frontier, China confirmed the pact. As a first step, the two armies will disengage from long-standing friction points in the Depsang Bulge in northern Ladakh, where China has wrested an advantage for years, and the Charding Ningling Nala in southeastern Ladakh's Demchok sector, where the Indian army dominates. As a second step, the most significant result of the resolution will be a resumption of patrolling by the Indian army in the Depsang and Demchok areas. The third step will involve the other three friction points, which emerged in May 2020. That is, the Galwan Valley, Gogra Hot Springs and the banks of the Pangong Lake. The buffer zones created following the June 2020 clash in Galwan will slowly give way to a resumption in routine patrolling by both armies under strictly agreed protocols. With disengagement completed and frontline troops pulled back, and patrolling resuming along the LAC, the two militaries will then de-escalate, which involves soothing temperatures by pulling back war-ready weaponry and equipment from the border areas, including tanks, vehicles, missiles, artillery, radars and more. The last phase will be de-induction, where both armies will shift out the divisions they've massed at the Ladakh border in order to check each other, leaving a pre-2020 routine military presence.
As far as we are concerned, we were looking at that we want to go back to the status quo of April 2020. Point number one. Thereafter, we will be looking at disengagement, de-escalation, normal management of line of actual control. And this normal management of line actual control will not just stop there. There are phases in that also. So this, what I am saying, it has been our stance from April 20 itself, when General Y.K. Joshi was the army commander, and even today that remains the same way. So as of now, what has happened? We are trying to restore the trust. How the trust will get restored? It will get restored once we are able to see each other. And we are able to convince each other, look, the buffer zones which are there, which have been created, we are not creeping. And both have to reassure each other. Patrolling gives you that kind of advantage.
The resolution achieved by the two countries won't reflect overnight, nor should it be expected that things will run as smoothly as described. After all, with China, nothing is ever what it seems. Chinese intentions, an enormous trust deficit, and mutual lessons learned from the ongoing standoff mean things will be slow and deliberate. But with both sides at least reaching a resolution, this is the first big sign of an overall thaw. For the Indian military, the guard will never be down. Bureau Report, India Today. So let's try and understand it. As we report this story, both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping are in Kazan at the BRICS summit. There's suspense in the air over the two leaders holding a rare bilateral after no engagements of that kind for many years since the standoff began in eastern Ladakh. So where does this leave India and China? how skeptical should we be? Let's get a realistic assessment of where things are at. Brahma Chelani is India's most respected strategic affairs analyst and expert. Colonel S. Dinny is a former commanding officer with an infantry battalion. In fact, during the India-China standoff, he retired shortly thereafter. Mr. Chelani and Colonel Dinny, my apologies for coming to you a little late. We had some breaking news coming in from Kazan that we needed to go to our report for. Mr. Chelani, I'd like to come to you first, sir. As we speculate about when that meeting might take place between Modi and Xi, reasonably sure that the decks appear to be cleared after that announcement by both sides that some kind of a resolution has been reached. How do you read this quote-unquote resolution, Mr. Chelani? How practical is it that some quarters are saying that this is a breakthrough? We, of course, in our reporting are saying we need to be very cautious about this.
You're right about a Xi Jinping-Modi meeting. That is imminent.
Yes.
But what has been resolved between the two countries is unclear. The Indian side yesterday spoke about a new patrolling arrangement. Normally, when two countries reach an agreement, both countries simultaneously release a statement. Yesterday, the announcement came only from India. And a day later, China reacts in a very low-key, cryptic manner, makes no mention of any new patrolling arrangement with India, nor does it provide any details whatsoever. So it's unclear as to what has been, quote-unquote, resolved. And there's a disconnect.
What does that lack of clarity say to you, Mr. Chelani?
Sorry?
What does that lack of clarity, in putting out these two statements one day apart, what does that tell you? Do you think it means it was just a cosmetic exercise to kind of clear the decks for a handshake at BRICS?
No. Some understanding has been reached between the two countries to facilitate a Xi Jinping-Narendra Modi meeting.
Yeah.
What is less clear is what specifically has been agreed upon, what is beyond doubt, as you yourself have been pointing out in your report, that this latest understanding does not mean the end of the military standoff, because ending the standoff is a three-phase process involving first disengagement, then de-escalation, and finally de-induction of troops.
Yes.
But I'm more concerned about the fact that a day after the foreign minister and the foreign secretary of India made the announcement of a new patrolling arrangement, there appears to be a disconnect between the Indian military and the diplomats at the MEA, because the Indian Army chief today said he put a damper on this talk of disengagement having been completed, that we have gone back to the situation of 2020. He said, and I'm quoting, "As far as we are concerned, we want to go back to the status quo of April 2020. Thereafter, we'll be looking at disengagement, de-escalation, and normal management of LAC." So this is a complete opposite of what the foreign minister said yesterday. So I am, as an observer, perplexed. The MEA puts out one spin. The army chief says something different a day later. At least get your act together. At least tell the Indian public what exactly has been agreed upon. I know that the Chinese are cryptic always, and they will never come clean on anything. But at least the Indian side should be speaking in one voice.
Colonel Dinny, how are you reading the statements coming out from the Indian government, the Indian Army, and China between yesterday and today? Do you share Mr. Chelani's concerns about there not being a full connect, a unified sort of message?
No, Shiv. To be very honest, I don't expect each one of those, whether it's a foreign secretary or the foreign minister or the chief or the Chinese spokesperson, giving out the exact verbatim same language. It's not a joint statement when a post a meeting between two leaders. It's a decision taken at a certain level, and what are the decisions. I think those things are very clear, even what the foreign secretary said, and even today when the army chief mentioned. First and foremost, as we all know, and I think you brought out in your report also, that disengagement, and let me also tell that this is a work in progress. So it is not that as of tomorrow everything is going to be resolved. You correctly said that it's a long journey towards resolution. So I put it as a work in progress, and this work started from April 2020 itself. It's a very unique case, Shiv, when there was actually conflict happening, and there was also talks happening at the same time. There was the corps commander level talks, and the 21 times the corps commander and level talks have happened. So it's a very unique thing in which the conflict was also happening, but talks and negotiations were also happening at the same time. So and after that, the level of talks increased. The NSA came into play, the foreign minister came into play. So these kind of talks are also happening at various levels. So it is not as if we were just having a posturing on ground. It is also talks were taking. So I find it's a work in progress. Now, where were we standing as of before this announcement? Before this announcement, there was disengagement in two scenarios. One was a disengagement which happened when the troops were in close contact, literally eyeball to eyeball contact. Post Galwan, there were places in which the troops were in close contact. At various phases of negotiations, those troops were pulled back, including from South Bank, the Chushul Heights, and all those places. The troops were pulled back, which is actually disengagement, and they were taken to further behind. Now, after that, what happened was there were still places in which the troops were in close contact, but they were not classically in eyeball to eyeball contact. From there also, there were an agreement made, a form of buffer zones were created so that the troops are not coming in close contact. And here I refer to the North Bank and other places where clashes had happened post April 2020. Now, after that also, there was two places, Depsang and Demchok, where the disengagement had not taken place. Yesterday, what we understand...
I'll just put that picture of the map on our wall so our viewers can know what you're talking about. Yes, please continue, Colonel.
Yeah, so yesterday the agreement is now the disengagement has taken place or will take place from Depsang and Demchok. So then that is where one can say the disengagement process is complete. So that is what is said. Now, when the disengagement process complete, that means now we have what is the next step? We all want to go back to April 2020. That is the status quo which we wanted. Correct. Now, when you say it's a status quo of April 2020, it is not just disengagement, it is not just restoration of patrolling, it is also involves the troops which had come, those also have to go back. But these will also happen only in a phased manner. That is the way army operates. That's the way any military operates. It doesn't happen that today you have disengaged and let's now all go. That doesn't happen, especially when there is so much of mistrust between both the countries and both the armies. So I feel that now that the disengagement process will be completed, the patrolling agreement has come in. Now, as far as the information which is coming out is that the patrolling will take place in those areas where there is, where the disengagement has taken place. However, a clarity, yes, definitely requires to be then. It needs to be, further clarified.
No, absolutely.
Coming days,
the clarity as far as, the modalities of the resumption of patrolling is just one of the many things that there appears to be no clarity about. But I want to zoom back out a little bit, to the diplomatic part. And thank you for that very comprehensive word on how how the resolution might play out militarily as part of this long journey. But Mr. Chelani, the last time a disengagement took place between India and China was sometime in 2022. After that, there have been many, many rounds of talks, both at the working mechanism level and the corps commander level. In your view, what has suddenly changed? We've seen reports of China suddenly being quite conciliatory. There have been increased engagement at the highest level between India and China at the foreign minister level. What has changed between 2022 and now that this forward movement was possible, sir?
Since you spoke of disengagement, let's take a step back and look at the first disengagement that happened at Doklam in 2017, August 2017. We disengaged. Within weeks, China re-entered and captured almost the entire Doklam Plateau. As far as the disengagement that happened in 3 specific areas of eastern Ladakh, Pangong, Galwan, and Hot Springs Dogra. We should not forget that the buffer zones that have been created largely on Indian territory. It's unclear now, this engagement at Depsang and Depsang, and as well as in the southernmost part of eastern Ladakh,
yes,
whether this involves the creation of any buffers. What the Reuters is reporting is that both sides will move back a bit from their present positions, and then according to a schedule, they'll be allowed to patrol up to their respective areas. Now, what does that mean? Is that, again, very unclear. But I think the bigger picture should not be lost. At the core of the military standoff has been China's encroachments on key borderlands of eastern Ladakh. In Depsang, the Chinese came in almost 18 kilometers into what India considered its territory. They still remain there. So what does this engagement entail? Does it entail going back somewhat from what they have occupied? Or are we going to have more of the buffer zone type of arrangements that we have seen in Pangong, in Galwan, and in Hot Springs, Gogra? But to the broader question that you asked about it, the fact is that both sides are interested in lowering their tensions. China is now beginning to confront long-term structural issues, including a demographic crisis, a slowing economy, a Western pushback against China's ambitions. All that is compelling China not to ruin its relationship with India. And India, too, has strategic imperatives to ensure that its relationship with China does not get ruptured, because balancing and hedging are essential to India's foreign policy of pursuing an independent approach to international relations. So both sides have imperatives to try and lower tensions, if not to mend fences.
Colonel Dinny, the word trust is used quite a bit when we talk about India and China. There's a huge trust deficit, both at the political level and at the military level. You had the Chief of the Army Staff, General Upadhyay, also talk about trust, about how rebuilding trust is key. But on the ground, can you tell us what form that is going to take? At the tactical level, you led an infantry unit that was literally eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese, during this entire crisis at the beginning of it. Can you tell us what rebuilding trust and, reimposing those structures for the resumption of patrolling, what is that going to look like on the ground for troops and commanders?
See, Shiv, it's definitely a factor. The trust factor is definitely missing for the last 4 years plus, primarily because the trust was developed over a period of time when there was frequent meeting between the commanders. There were also occasions in when the troops also used to meet each other in a more friendly manner. But because of this, this constant, lack of patrolling and other issues, there's no contact between the troops. Now, what the army chief said is absolutely right, that this patrolling will lead to more trust. And I think I'll go by what Gaurav always says, that trust but verify. So for verification, I still believe that physical verification on ground is still the best form of verification. You may have any kind of technology, but at the end of the day, if you go on ground and see, that is worth 1,000 reports. So for that to happen, patrolling must move in. So once patrolling starts, once verification comes, like what Mr. Brahmacharya also mentioned, certain apprehensions, all those apprehensions will go only once you go physically and see. Similarly, from the Chinese side. So once that happens, it becomes more clarity will come in, and that is where the trust will come in. And my only concern would be still that the areas of differing perceptions, where there has been, there were conflicts even before. And I think the trigger of this particular incident of conflict also happened in that area of differing perceptions in North Bank. There, when the patrolling happens, there more coordination, more transparency, and a much more, deft handling would be required, because troops in close proximity especially in a contested area, can go in a totally different direction. So overall, I think as the troops meet, the chances of trust increases because they can, verify themselves. But at the same time, there is also an issue that wherever there are conflicts, wherever there are, differing perceptions, that has to be handled very, very carefully.
We're going to, continue to report from Kazan, from Delhi in the run up to that meeting that is hasn't been scheduled, hasn't been announced, but we are reasonably sure it's going to happen between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping, the President of China. Thank you very much, Brahmachelani and Colonel Estini, for helping us decode, understand a complicated and unfolding issue. Work in progress, both in Kazan, both here in Delhi, and definitely in Ladakh.